Podcast, episode 4. My name is Whachacha, and I've got with me Andrew from Tabletop Central.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, this is part 2, which we're also recording on October 8th, 2024. Last episode, we had a nice discussion about what it takes to put on a board gaming convention, and we had your unique perspective on that kind of stuff. And today, we're going to be doing a little more of our general, podcasting. We're going to talk about a little bit about the discussion about board game prices, which have gotten both very high. Everything's kind of gotten high, but there's some really big Kickstarters and lots of ways to spend money on gaming nowadays. I want to talk a little bit about terrain, board games that have a big table presence terrain. There's some discussion there. And then we'll take a few questions from the mailbag. We're going to each chat about a few games that we've played somewhat recently, and then we'll close up the show. But to get started here, actually, we were just kind of talking off camera. You own a couple of video game cabinets.
Yes, I have 2 arcade cabinets, one that is in actual working order and one that is not. So one is a project, and it's the definition of a project at this point. But the other one was...
What's the project one?
So the project one is Continental Circuit or Continental Circus, depending on who you talk to.
Okay.
It has 2 different titles. Sometimes on screen, I think it says Continental Circuits, but on the side it says Continental Circuit, and they just didn't update the game ROM when they brought it to the U.S. Because
you sit inside of this one.
Yes, so it's a Formula One style racing game from 1985, I want to say. But yeah, it's a full cockpit. You sit in it. You've got a gear shifter next to you. You got a wheel in front. They made an upright version, which is the more common one that you would see, but this is the sit-in-it version. And if I can get everything working, it will be in 3D.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which is part of why I'm interested in it, more than the racing game part of it. So,
I wanted to talk a little bit, now that we talked about this, and it reminded me of this video game I played. There's video game arcades are very, very popular nowadays, where you go and you kind of like drink and play, play arcade games. Now you're probably wondering, like, hey, I thought this is a board gaming podcast, excuse me, but it is. But this is what I want to talk about, because I love these games and things that have connection to board gaming or interesting for a board game design purpose. Gaming is leaked into everything, which I love, like learning about things through gaming. That's another conversation I'd like to have on a future episode here. But we played this one. It was a cabinet, a big cabinet, and it was 2-sided, so you could stand on. It was basically 2 cabinets back to back, and you would play against. Your opponent will be on the other side of the cabinet. Now this is called Killer Queen. Have you heard of this?
I have. I haven't played it, but I've seen it.
So, this is where I think, like, all of this gaming and all, I talked to somebody recently, or this past weekend when I was in Cleveland, about this whole thing about, like, like, where he was like, he was like, oh, I heard you're doing this board gaming podcast. And he said, I play all these roll and write games, or roll and move games, from the 80s and stuff. And he listed off stuff, and I'm like, I don't know any of those games, because why would I? They're garbage to me, right? Not to be rude, but like, it's like the modern gaming, we're like junk. It's all garbage, like from 1980 below, because it's all these sort of roll and write, games that we would never want to play now, because there have been so many advances in the game design. I think that pushes all of it, everything forward. And so this game I thought was really fascinating, because it felt like a board game in some ways, and you could play like this. I'm like, could this be translated to the tabletop? And I think that those discussions that get your designer juices flowing. So there's like 3 ways to play to win this. Like, there's one way you could bring these little guys up and fill them up in the top. There's another way to kill all the enemy. So there's you can plant these eggs at the top of the screen. You can put a guy in this thing and if you move it to your side, you win. And then if you kill the enemy's queen a number of times, then you win. So it's like, what are you going for? So like, and the player on the other side is, if they're going for the strategy at the bottom and you're going for this killing strategy, and they're like, oh wow, I better get down there and stop them. So it's really very fascinating. And this idea that, like, you can get 4 players on each side playing this kind of against each other. Really, I thought it was like, I was like, oh my God, this is like board gaming, today versus board gaming in 1980. Felt like this is what gaming could be like, video gaming today versus the That was a very sizable tangent for this thing.
It's a good conversation to have. And
having multiple win conditions, right?
Yeah, and I don't know. I feel like, at least in the games that I've played, it's usually multiple lose conditions and like one win condition.
Sure.
So it is kind of a different way to do it. But I mean, you could easily translate the game to a board game, and there have been, video games translated to board games.
Of course.
Even back at the games that the guy was talking about. Recently, I was at like an antique store, and they had a Popeye board game. And I was like, oh, I like Popeye. And I looked at it, and I was like, oh, this is the arcade Popeye. Like the Nintendo-produced arcade game translated into a board game.
That's fascinating.
And I thought about buying it, because that's like my favorite arcade game.
Is it?
But of the like classic, 80s arcade games, that one's like my favorite. I didn't end up buying it, because people were like, yeah, it's not very good. But
just I think those games a lot of times people buy them just have them on their shelves because it's that long, long Monopoly style box. Yeah. I just saw this like funny tweet about like where it was like, this dialogue, and it was like, Popeye and Olive Oil was like, I'm going to the store, and Popeye's like, hey, don't forget this. She's like, I'm not gonna forget the spinach. That's kind of funny. So let's talk a little bit about I really like this new kind of trend. So I saw this article about Lego getting back into the board gaming space. So Asmodee, Lego team up to launch Lego-focused board gaming design studio. This is from Board Game Wire. So they're going to make games, but you're going to have the ability to build with Legos. Okay, so that's a pretty fascinating. Have you played any? Because they've had some.
Yeah,
games.
they've got I have a few.
You own some?
Yeah, I do own a couple that they've made, and I mean, I feel like these will be better games than what we've had before. But I've seen people prototype with Legos in some of their parts too, because these games had like dice where you could like pop off the sides and put new faces on them and things, because they're all Lego pieces. So
yeah, so if you're just tuning in this time, you didn't see part one. Andrew's involved quite a bit with Kudo Plays board gaming design, so that's where you're playtesting a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so more often than not, I'm playing prototype games than actual published finished games.
So, can you think of any minds to that Lego games that you played for
so
published games?
So I had Minotaurus, which was like a Minotaur maze game. Which is kind of neat because you got the Lego pieces, you can make whatever maze you want out of it. So there is kind of, here's how you set it up, but then, after that, they encourage you to make your own maps, your own rules, everything else with it, because that's part of it.
For kids, that's great, right? Like, I mean, especially, like, I know, like, my nieces and nephews and stuff, like, anytime there's something where, like, it's like, in a video game, a board, like a level editor, they love that. Which is great, and it's a great creative thing. Now we're going to talk a little bit about these. I went out of order, actually. I started with the wrong thing, but we're going to talk about board gaming pricing in a minute. But this is related a little bit because Legos are insanely expensive. I cannot believe the price of Legos these days. Like have you noticed? Do you collect Legos?
I don't, but I have. I know some friends that do, and I have seen some of the like giant sets that they've put out. And,
So even the smaller sets are very pricey, so it's interesting I'm kind of curious what that's going to come out to be, or whether like these games will have the ability where you can play with your own pieces. Lego is as big as it's ever been also, which we kind of talked about last episode about that sort of thing. So I think it's kind of interesting that you'll be able, it's a good crossover. People will come in from Lego, like that, like are like, oh, I'm a fan of Legos playing this. But other than that, and I'm going to relate these two things in a second, the Hero Quest has returned. Are you familiar with Hero Quest at all? Hero. Go ahead, yes sir. It's Hero Quest, right?
Yeah, Hero Quest, the like old Milton Bradley,
the big
game, the big one. I don't know if it's Milton Bradley, but
so I misspoke. I mean Heroscape, which is different than Hero Quest. I loved Hero Quest, and it's a whole own thing. But Heroscape, have you played Heroscape?
I have not played Heroscape.
You're familiar with it?
I know that it exists. I don't really know that much about it.
So I've actually never played it, but I just know because for many years it was one of these like Grail games where they're very expensive. People loved it, but it wasn't really commercially viable or available. And essentially what it is this sort of like a, war games is so big and popular and stuff, and it's such a huge genre of gaming. But that's always very complicated. And this was sort of like a board gamers war game where you would have little armies or squads fighting each other, and you would set up this huge like hex board, and you have tons of these big plastic pieces, and you could fill your living room with this terrain and stuff, and it would be like trees and buildings and all these kind of things. But it's kind of a cool thing. And now they've come back, and I've seen them in the game shop, like big packs of like terrain with like palm trees and palm terrain, like jungle terrain or what. So there's a lot that you can do with that. And for years,
they just relaunched it at Gen Con, right?
Recently, I don't know if it was Gen Con, but around that time. So I've been noticing those things around, and I think it's very interesting, like that there's this kind of crossover with that. And the overarching thing I want to talk about is the idea that like there is such a cool thing about like if you go to like a wargaming convention, or you look at like what people are playing war games, part of the hobby in that is making the terrain, building and painting the models, and you essentially have these kind of like toys, right, or statues, and now you have something to do with them, right? Like you're not just, because that's half of the hobby, is like you could just, and there's people that buy that stuff, assemble it, paint it, put it in a little diorama,
the game.
Yeah, they throw away the game bits or whatever. They don't even care. Yeah. And it's interesting because, but then like I remember as a kid, you could be like, okay, this is a cool action figure, and you knock your action figures together and play or whatever. But being able to just make to have kind of a point to building this tank or this this building. Now you can say, okay, well now I get to put it on the table and actually play a game around it. And I think that's really fascinating. And there isn't a lot of it in the board gaming space. I think HeroScape is doing that. This new Lego thing is kind of doing that, right? But it's not really something that you see in the board gaming space.
There's a little bit with, sort of the same idea of like people that might be into one aspect of it but not even worry about the game with like CCGs and things.
Yeah.
I know, like, I used to have Pokemon cards because I played Pokemon on my Game Boy. I never played Pokemon, the card game.
Okay.
I was just like, oh yeah, look, I got a Cubone. That's nice.
So you wanted the card just because of the art,
so like
a trading card.
Yeah, it was basically
like
just like
card.
as a trading card, as a baseball card, that kind of deal. I don't have them anymore, but there's definitely some people like that like the artwork and the theme on these things, but don't necessarily care about the rules that go with it.
So when you're talking board games, one of the nice things is that like you can take a box, and this is going to kind of tie into our conversation about the big Kickstarters and stuff in a moment. But this is a lot of parallels here. But like, you can take a box, set it up, and you're playing a game, right? And it's, like that's one of the nice things about it, is to be able to just get the gaming in, right? And some of these people, as we said, like they're making these elaborate boards and things. Obviously, that takes a lot more time. You're not getting these games to the table as easily if you're building this huge HeroScape board. But I just find it really interesting because like those are aspects to the wargaming world. When you build these boards and you build these wonderful things and paint these things and do all this crafting and hobbying, it's pretty awesome, I think. But I love, like we just talked about on the last episode, fromage. Like cheese is so. I mean, I love those themes. I love learning about those things. Like Sky Team just dazzled me. I love just flying the airplanes, and I love farming games as well. But it's like, why haven't we had these kind of crossovers? Now, recently I played. Have you played Redwood?
I have not.
So Redwood is it kind of is almost like an X-wing. Have you played X-wing?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, you put for those who don't know, you have your ship, and like you put a maneuver down. You move the ship to the end of the maneuver tool, and then you can like measure the distance as to where you can shoot. What kind of weapons you can shoot at different ranges. And they have this new game Redwood where it's the same exact thing where you have a movement tool that you'll pick to move your guy, and then you'll have, but instead of this range thing to shoot, it's a different shape, like for a different, like a wide angle lens or like a far away shot, and you're just taking pictures. And so the idea that like this is like a wargaming kind of almost like the way you're moving around and doing things, but now we've taken it into a really nicer, like welcoming theme or a different theme, which is great. And so I like to see these kind of things. Like, why aren't there more crossovers like that? I mean, like why are these two worlds? Why on one hand do we have huge wargaming tables with like cool looking trees and buildings and tanks all over the place, but we don't have that same sort of mirror on the we don't have that in the board gaming world? Is it because it's so much easier to set up and not worry about, and people don't get as invested in those games?
I think partly it's just people are used to a certain way that things are done, and so they keep making things that are kind of in that same vein. They innovate on mechanics and things, but not necessarily on table presence. I mean, there has been a push recently for more look at this thing on the table. Like I've noticed a lot more stuff like Everdell over there has like a big tree or whatever, and so like there's a lot more stuff like that happening in the last, I don't know.
What was that one? There was one with the trees. I can't remember the name of it. It's a whole forest of trees in the sunlight, depending on where the sun is going.
Photosynthesis.
That's it. Yeah. Have you played that?
Yeah. So that's got a bunch of like little paper craft trees that you put together. So sometimes the game is a little frustrating at the beginning because you got to put all this stuff together. Or like Colt Express, you got to build the whole train. Things like that. So there's a little bit of that going on, but I feel like with wargaming and things like in miniatures games, it's a little bit different because like the terrain doesn't come with the game. You get the choice of what terrain you want, and so there's some aspect of that with board games where people have like upgraded components that you can buy, but usually those are also from the manufacturer of the game. There's not like, other than inserts, there's not a whole lot of like community created things that you can put in there.
There's a game, so I saw this is a little while back, but Wargamer, wargamer.com. I'll put it on the screen here. Herding 28 is a pacifist sheep herding alternative to Warhammer. And so this is like the kind of thing where you have this alternative to Warhammer. You have sheep, right? That's awesome to me. I really love that idea, like, because I love the table. We are attracted to a table presence like that. Like, you mentioned Everdell, we were talking about photosynthesis. Any of these games, Cult Express you mentioned, like, all these games that just, I think it's stuff like, like, even Rampage, where you have the building these things up. Anything that has a really gorgeous, presence on the table draws people over, especially at a convention, and then those games become like more sought after. And I think that's kind of tied in a little bit with these, like, we'll talk about in a little bit about, like, Puerto Rico. Have you seen the Awakened Realms, Puerto Rico and Castles of Burgundy Kickstarters?
The like new editions or whatever.
They have all these miniatures for buildings and stuff. So like, I remember when I was playing. You ever played Le Havre or anything like that?
No, I've never played that one.
It's one of my favorite games, but all the art is on the cards. But I'm like, how cool it'd be to build your tableau of like putting these actual buildings down that like if you and being like, hey, I'm really farming, I've got all these farm fields, or like, hey, I'm really industrialized and I've got a lot of buildings or ships or whatever. I think that's so fascinating.
They sell like the 3D Catan sets and things that have like the raised texture and stuff, which are always really cool looking, but I've never bought one. It's like,
So you mentioned Catan. That's a really great observation, because yes, they have that 3D, and of course that must be so much more enjoyable to play on. In Catan, you could see being able to sell so many, but obviously you need to be able to sell enough. And Catan is the kind of game, obviously, is very popular for either non-gamers or gamers that are just dipping into the hobby a little bit. It's got that kind of notoriety to it. So I could see that being a very popular, easier one to make. But of course, you have to have enough, popular enough game to do that.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned Puerto Rico and Castles of Burgundy. Those are two, like, been the board game geek top 20 for like 10 years.
They've been around for
15
a while.
years.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting thing. I think it's a really missed opportunity for for board gamers to really enjoy. I mean, I guess probably people that are modeling World War II stuff, there's going to be like 1,000 times more likely than somebody modeling a little farm field, right? But I think it's really kind of interesting. So, any other?
Yeah, I mean, I would like it if more things used like mechanics and tropes of one genre for something else. It brings to mind, there was it was maybe like last year or something. I was thinking about going to another convention, and when looking at the list of games, there was an RPG called 3 Hour Tour, I think was what they were calling it. And immediately I'm like, is this an RPG that's just an episode of Gilligan's Island? And I was, all excited about that idea. And then it turned out it was like a Call of Cthulhu session where you just happen to be shipwrecked.
I see.
And I was like, no, I want to build a coconut radio. And then I want someone else who's playing Gilligan to be incentivized to break it somehow, because that's what happens. Something completely non-serious, but using
Well,
RPG
who's the most
mechanics.
likely person or publisher to do that is Prospero Hall's been doing all these Alien and like Fast and the Furious.
They're very good at that.
They do a lot. Back to the Future. They kind of bring these. I just got Escape from New York, but that's not by them. They have there's a lot of those games kind of coming out, and they're simpler. And you could see, like, obviously the Gilligan theme would not be a theme where you'd want it to be such a robust game. Right. So you have to be a lot lighter.
But I'm talking like a full-on.
You want a full-on
RPG? Like, did you ever play the Wendy's RPG?
Like the Wendy's, like Frosties and burgers.
Yeah,
Wendy's,
the Wendy's fast food chain.
RPG.
Yeah, made a full it was a PDF that you could download, but it was like 100 pages with like a bunch of custom art and rules and scenarios, and I think we played it once.
Is this like recent? When was?
It was I think it was like right around the beginning of the pandemic, maybe.
Oh my god!
Because me and a group of people played it online, so I think they were working on it before that, and that's just kind of when.
Can you imagine? There's some game group that's like playing as Wendy, and you think like there's probably like 50,000 Wendy's employees that are like, I hate my job, and somebody's there like at home like all right, I'm gonna roll to make the fries.
Yeah, well, I think it's just they had a super nerd on the marketing team that did this as a side project for fun.
Can you imagine taking the time to do all of that but for Wendy's?
Well, I mean, they had custom artwork of like burger themed characters and stuff. I was like a bard of the Nugget Clan or something.
Oh, really? So it was like that, like
something like that. But yeah, like it was all like fantasy themed. But
Frosties.
Yeah.
I'll be the guy drinking the Frosties.
You could probably find it online still. I don't know. But
that's pretty interesting. That's a really interesting thing. So along these same kind of lines as like this, I mean, you can see Lego seems like much more approachable because you can have a box full of Legos, build this, then play the game. And in fact, you could say like, hey, this week, kids, we'll spend a few days building this up, and then on the weekend we'll play, whatever we built. That's pretty cool. And then you can add in your own pieces or whatever and spur a lot of creativity. So I think that Lego thing is a really fascinating, awesome little connection there. So that's fascinating. And then you also have people have a lot. Now I mentioned like you make a lot of models of things, like because you're a World War II enthusiast or whatever, and so you have a lot of these models that you're building in dioramas, and then maybe you game with them, maybe you don't. But there was another thing which was a giant robot. So there was a book called Giant Monster Rampage, and there's a number of these systems, but this was a system. It's for a toy battle system game, and essentially it has all these rules and stuff. It's just a book that you'd buy, much like a role-playing book or whatever. And it gives you rules for playing with your action figures and stuff. Now, we were just kind of chatting off camera about you're a big Godzilla fan, and
that's true.
And this was like a game system you could take and play with your Godzilla action figures or whatever. And there's a whole host of these that are basically game systems that you can play. Like, hey, I got all my G.I. Joes. Let me buy a game system. I like playing with these characters, and now I'm playing with a purpose kind of as well.
That's how the whole genre started.
How the whole
like miniatures war game.
Is that right?
Yeah. So H.G. Wells made Little Wars, which was a rule set for using the toys that he already had around, the like figures that's awesome. They had, and they made a game to play with them.
Yes, that's I do remember that now. Yeah. That's pretty cool. And also, when I think of also that, I'm a big horror fan, of course, and Peter Cushing had his whole set of miniatures where he would paint his toy soldiers or whatever. I think that's really kind of interesting that these books exist and stuff. And I feel like, I like to see these bigger productions in that way, and I think that is kind of a missed opportunity. Although obviously that would probably be a more expensive niche part of the hobby, which is bad, right? Being more expensive and being niche are the two things that are kind of at odds a little bit. But I really do think that that's like really fascinating, and I wish there was kind of more of that. Not even just that, but like it's in everything, right? Like these, like you have, So when we were looking at Sky Team, when I did a review on Sky Team, talking about the fact that I'm like, ooh, you could really make a combat version of this. Have you played Sky Team?
No, I haven't gotten a chance to.
Oh, it's amazing. It's just one that spiels the jar.
Yeah, I've heard great things about it.
Yeah, but it has all these different airports you can fly into, and so they have different challenges and there's different modules, so you can play through a lot, which is one of the things that I really love. But I was like, oh, you could make this into kind of a war game as well, where you're like, you're shooting, you're doing the same essential thing because it's a dice roller cooperative game. You can't communicate. You're just sort of placing your dice together. But I wish it would go the other way more often. Like I say, like these kind of things would kind of make more interesting experiences for the, for board gamers. So I'm really happy to see that that Heroescape is back. I hope that kind of is a little cross thing and the Lego thing. I don't really care about Legos, but I do like the idea that this is a kind of a thing. And not only that, but like you think of like legacy games, like almost all the legacy games are, there are a lot of campaign, not legacy, because there's not very many legacy games. Campaign games are oftentimes like, hey, I'm a dungeon crawling thing, I'm going through, you're leveling up, you're killing monsters. But in, there's only one style of game that has a campaign, and it is legacy, which is Charterstone, really. Can you think of any other games that are like, that you're able to like sort of continue your building of a city or you're building farms and things?
There's plenty of legacy and campaign games, but yeah, usually I don't know. I've played a few. I don't really like the concept of like destroying parts of a game as you go, so I've kind of like maybe a legacy game's not for me.
Not for you, yeah, definitely.
But I do like campaign games where you can like save a state of the game, but if nothing destructive, you could play it again. But I haven't played that many of them.
But most of them, I think, are like that, and that's why I think it's like, when you get done with a game, like you get done with like a generally like some kind of city building game or farming, like Agricola. You're done with Agricola. You're done with Le Havre. You're done with Caverna. You've put all your farms and your buildings and things, and you're wiping it out, and you're starting again. Suburbia, all that kind of stuff. And to me, I think it's kind of cool if you're if you can kind of continue with that. So again, I think it's just like there's a lot of things that are as for a game designer. If I was designing games, I think I would be like, look, here's this wealth of things that already exist.
You could be a game designer if you want to.
Yes.
Not to derail you too much, but we can help with that.
With Kudo Plays, yeah. So that's kind of a little. Anything else you want to say about that big?
Yeah, it is cool when you can carry something over from game to game. Sometimes you lose really bad, so you're like, a fresh start would be great.
Sure.
Because this person's got a lot more going on for them. But other times, it would be kind of neat to, like, you've already built kind of an engine for some of these things, so if you can, like, start at least partially there to see how far you could take it.
Sure.
It's kind of cool and could be nice. I mean, a lot of the time, if the engine you're building won't be sustainable much longer after where the game ends.
Sure. There's obviously reasons.
Sometimes there's reasons it doesn't happen, but it is kind of a neat idea.
But you'd have...
that's built into it from the beginning. Yeah.
That's part of the game, is to develop it, right? I think just in general, like, what are there any, like... Can you think of any mechanisms in any kind of a war game that would be interesting for you to, like, to bring across?
Well, or I don't know. Yeah, so, like... So I haven't played a whole lot of war games. I did a little bit of Warhammer, and I do like So I played as orcs.
Yeah,
and I do like the. I'm trying to remember what they called it. The looted wagon.
The looted wagon. I've not heard of it.
So it was a unit that didn't have an actual model because it was the orcs having stolen someone else's vehicle or tank or something like that. And so usually, part of the reason I played orcs was a few different people I knew got the starter set and wanted to play Space Marines, and they didn't want to play with the orcs, so they had half of an army, and they gave it to me. And then the other half was, those miniatures are really expensive, but if I can just glue a couple parts together, random like bits, I have a looted wagon.
Okay, I see. Okay, interesting.
But the idea being that maybe I face an army of Space Marines and I beat them, I take that wagon and use it in the next game.
Okay.
And now I've got that as part of my army. It's kind of fun.
Yeah,
it kind of carries over, and especially if it looks specifically like the one that you beat, even if that's their miniature. They're
not giving you their $90 tank.
But if you have a game group with somebody frequently, you could use that for the next game when they bring it over again or something.
So this herding 28, the passive sheep herding alternative, I mean, you think if this came out widespread, you think people are buying that thing?
I think you could potentially, depending on how they sell it. I mean, you know, in video game realm, Goat Simulator was popular.
I was just thinking about all that stuff.
You know, it just
Animal
depends on how you market it. Yeah, if you want it to be really quaint and cutesy, you could do kind of like Animal Crossing, or you could like lean into the absurdity that we are making a game just about, you know, a miniatures game about herding sheep and just like really.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a dog or something, you get your kind of dog and you put it in the game. It's a little miniature. Like there's a definitely like a crowd for cozy games, like for video games that people love. Stardew Valley and like Animal Crossing and all that kind of stuff. You know, Dorf Romantic is a great. I mean, like I love that game, and that is like, it's just peaceful. We're playing and there's no stress to play. Have you tried that one?
There's no, I haven't, but I haven't gotten it to the table yet.
Yeah.
But there is definitely a market for cozy games, like you said. So I think you could market a sheep herding game. Okay.
Yeah.
I think there was like a card game or something that was about sheep herding that I saw or something, but it was like really focused on the dog. So it's like you're the dog. People love dogs, so you kind of like sell it as the dog aspect. But it wasn't like, you know, miniatures rules using, you know, templates and you know, tape measures and things like that. So no blast radius for a sheep.
So just I mean, this is very like kind of an untidy topic, but I guess at the end of the day, I would love just, I think it's a really great, for game designers and stuff, it's a really great opportunity to bring over, you know, like Redwood, you know, and Redwood did great.
Yeah.
I mean, and I bought the regular version from my local gaming shop, but that was kickstarted with all these extras and all this kind of stuff. I would love to see, like, you know, that's an opportunity to take some of these wargaming mechanisms, bring them over to like cozier themes and different themes, because we as gamers love to see that. Table presence is huge. Lego is getting involved now. HeroScape is back. To see some of these other things in this game, like Herding 28, of like, you know, this cozy alternative to Warhammer. You know, let's see what we can do. I think that's a really great area that, like, if you're looking for some ideas for game design, I'd love to see some more crossover or like cross-pollinating or whatever, because I think that just helps. At the end of the day, it's just a lot more ideas and interesting things.
That's the design challenge. Anybody out there who's a game designer, find something that's a mechanic that's very specifically about this one thing, and put it in something the complete opposite and see if you can make it work.
Yeah. So you are involved quite a bit in Kudo Plays, and you're probably wondering why we haven't. But my next guest we're gonna talk about that quite a bit. So so we tended. I thought it'd be more interesting to talk about your running of the convention and stuff last episode of stuff. So I thought it'd be a little more. But yeah, so this connected kind of topic is the idea of, like, now obviously that stuff is expensive, but games are very expensive now. A lot of them are much more expensive, and that's due to a couple of reasons. Obviously, inflation is up. Like, we just went through a pandemic. There's a lot of shipping costs now, so it's only natural that games would be more expensive now than they would be 10 years ago. That's a given, right? But it's not really that I want to focus on. It's just the idea that now we have these. You know, we talked about Kickstarter a little bit before. We were talking about this, what you put for $2,500 or whatever. You know, now they're like, you know, these like Cool Mini or Not, Awakened Realms, these massive kind of games. Do you have any initial thoughts before I kind of...
Yeah, well, I mean, these days, basically, the price determines the value for a lot of people. So if a game is cheaper, they don't see it as being as good of a game.
That's fascinating.
I don't agree with it, but that's the way a lot of people see things, or... You know, or if the game doesn't have a bunch of miniatures, if it doesn't have a bunch of extra bonus components and things like that, really high production value stuff, then it's not seen as being as good similarly. So sometimes, you know, we used to have a bunch of games that were poorly cut cardboard. And as people keep getting better production, now that's kind of the standard, and so people almost require that. It's like, oh no, you have to have metal components, and you have to have these deluxe dice, and you have to have these miniatures and things like that, and you know, your rule book has to have linen finish, and
cards,
you know, all this kind of stuff. And if you don't have that, then you're not seen as, you know, a AAA title to like bring video game terms into it.
So there's a couple things about there's optional buys for like the table mats and things. Now, kind of what got me thinking about this a little bit more was there was a few recent. So I mentioned Awakened Realms, and they've taken a couple of very popular games, two of the biggest games of all time, Castles of Burgundy and Puerto Rico, and they've made these lavish designs for these games. In addition to that, like something Orleans, I was just looking at a little thing on the channel about whether I was thinking about backing this. Sort of deluxe anniversary edition box, and that was a couple €100. So in the shipping for that and stuff, so it probably would have cost me easily $300 for this kind of a game, right? And so and oftentimes if these are favorite games of yours, you already own the games, and now you have to buy these extra versions. And so, but it's not just that; it's also because the Awakened Realm stuff, like. You could easily spend a few $100s on it. Now, there was a game, Santorini, that I quite liked, and I think it was probably $50 or $60. Have you tried that?
Yeah.
And now they have this new one, and they had it kickstarted or pre-ordered and stuff. And I wanted the expansion because there's like a solo cooperative variant that you can buy an expansion for. And, they have a reissue of the game with extra, better components and things. And the components in Santorini were really good to start with. But now I'm looking at this thing, I'm like, easily the expansion itself is like $70, and then everything else but it also would be better if you had the updated components and stuff. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, am I going to spend $200 on Santorini and Santorini's expansion? That seems nuts to me, And in this world, kind of, you're making a decision of like, it's kind of antithesis it goes against this idea is the fact that modern gamers. You just mentioned about Heat is on your shelf, and you played somebody else's.
Yeah.
Most modern gamers and some people listening to this podcast, avid gamers, are playing games like once or twice, and they are moving on. I can look at my game shelf here, and I've got a dozen, at least 15 games up there that I haven't even touched yet. So it's a really fascinating thing because you're making a decision. For most people, making a decision. Do you buy $300 worth of this gorgeous, like drool-worthy Puerto Rico? Or do you buy 5 other new board games? So, what do you have any thoughts on this?
I pretty much will not buy a game that's over $100.
That's your hard cutoff.
Unless I know the people.
Okay.
Like, if my friends are making it, then I will buy the deluxest version that they have to support them. But if a game is over $100, then I'm probably not going to buy it. Unless it's like a really big thing that's really good. But in general, with the amount of times, like the amount that I actually get games off the shelf and onto the table, really big, is gonna kind of decreases its chances of getting played. The smaller the game is, the more likely I'm gonna find time to play it, and get my money's worth out of it. So. Yeah, I don't know. The bigger and more expensive the game, the less likely I am to care about it.
That's interesting.
Things that fit in like the $60 range is kind of like the standard for a lot of.
I think that 60 was the standard for a long time.
I think it still is for certain things. 40 to 60 depending on the size of it. Those I might just impulse buy something. We just yesterday impulse bought the. Lord of the Rings duels for Middle Earth.
Oh yeah. That's a new version of the
Seven Wonders duel. Yeah.
Is that a favorite of yours?
No, I mean we liked it well enough, but I like Lord of the Rings, and so everyone's been raving about it, and so we just kind of impulse bought it because we were at the local game store and it was right there, and it was like, well, it's $35.
So this is
interesting. Like that. So it was like smaller box, theme I like, from a game that was pretty good.
You own Duel already.
Yes.
So this is what's interesting to me is that you're buying pretty much the same game again, reskinned.
I mean, it's reskinned. There's some difference to it from what I've been told. And, maybe I get rid of Duel. If,
sure.
If there's a game that I kind of like and, Seven Wonders is there, but I could have a Lord of the Rings Seven Wonders with better artwork. Maybe I'll have the Lord of the Rings version and I'll get rid of the other one. I don't know.
So I think having a robust secondary market probably does help people to make these buys, right? Like that. Did that enter in your head, or were you like the fact that I'll probably just sell the other Duel and then I could get this one? Like, do you think that helps people to buy these?
It was mostly just like, ooh, pretty. I want it.
So you didn't think about it too much.
Yeah, I didn't think about it until after we got it home, and then I see the shelf of games and I go, oh yeah, where are we gonna put that?
So do you think that like
one in, one out kind of?
that's the system that I developed that I've never ever actually stuck to.
No, we've never stuck to that either.
Yeah, I think many a gamer probably has it. So do you? But do you think like probably having a robust second market is what helps people to buy as many games as they do, knowing they can sell them and trade them?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people do that. I don't know how robust the market is though. Now, that being said, we were at the local game store because they were doing a used game sale, and we brought as many games as we could enter into that because we have too much stuff. So there is some market for that.
That's Titan. Dan Dudley was our last guest. That's his shop. That's his shop.
He was there.
Yeah. So this kind of thing like this. So when you look at the Kickstarter and you see like you scroll through and you see like all these minis and the the play mat and all this extra, that doesn't make you excited. You're not thinking like, oh my god, I gotta get this thing.
No, I mean like if there's a play mat, it better fit in the box.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, I don't want it.
Yeah, that's the thing. A Century Sword had a good one, right? Where it filled right in the box.
Yeah, but like a lot of times they have like, oh, look at this neoprene mat. I'm like, that's great.
Where's it gonna go?
Yeah, like. Looking here at your game shelf, there is no space between anything. It is full, exactly.
Alien Legendary was another one. They had a really nice map, but it fit right in the box.
Yeah. I really like Alien Legendary. That one's very good.
So,
but yes, the mat fits in the box, nice and easy. I don't have to find an extra spot for any sort of play mat or anything like that.
Well, you're talking about storage now too, and I think that's the other thing. When you see these big Awakened Realms, all this stuff, like Suburbia had a really amazing, that's one of my favorite games, had this huge, and that was only probably $200 at the time. Now, if it was out, I'm sure it would be like they'd find ways to get it up to $300 easily.
Yeah.
But, that's a storage issue, which these big games, like you see, I've got this stack of Marvel Zombicide over here. Good God, what an insane thing that was. But, like, they get bigger and bigger, and I feel like it's harder to get them to the table, when you have a bigger game, as you mentioned, right? And the idea of storing these is another huge thing. So, like, but we as board gamers, I mean, it's hard to ignore that, like, I mean, those Kickstarters for those games that I've been mentioning, they reached multi-million dollars. People are buying them. Like, people, I mean, like, granted, they're more expensive, easier to reach those higher numbers because people are spending more money, but, like, people are buying them. They want them, and they're going to keep coming. But I think it's kind of, like, it comes with all these other drawbacks. So, and I think that the most interesting thing about it is that, like, people are not playing the same game so many times. So what is it worth to get this, like, this game you already got and you're spending like hundreds of dollars for this upgraded version or whatever? What do you think that's a bubble that's going to pop? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think we're at a point where like nerd collector stuff is like at an all-time high. I mean, maybe we're past the bubble a little bit. I don't see people collecting Funko Pops as much as they used to and things like that. But there was kind of, I don't know, I guess when me growing up, so you mentioned earlier I'm a big Godzilla nerd, right?
Oh, yeah.
So when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of like Godzilla toys, Godzilla comics, that sort of stuff. So like when I was, a kid, I had everything. Like, everything that came out, I had.
Yeah.
Now it's impossible for me to have everything.
Crazy, yeah.
So we may be oversaturated and past the point where, like, people have the completionist mindset. Because, like, I've definitely had that in the past where it's like, I like this thing, I'm getting all of this thing. And I guess I still have that for some things, but, I think it's just, like, impossible to keep up now.
Well, I wonder how much that impacts things, right? Like, so, like, people that are just getting into the hobby, they've been in the board game hobby for maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, right? Like maybe they see that Kickstarter and think, oh my God, that's amazing, I gotta have that. And that's driving a lot of that. Because like, I wonder how much that is. I mean, there's no way for me to know that. But like, I think about like when I first started and I would be like, oh, I love this game. And then I would go on Board Game Geek Store and I would buy all the little promos. Now I'm like, I don't need that it's like one card, it's $5. Unnecessary to the game, don't really care. And those, they add up so quickly. There are some that are like useful. I just bought some extra buildings for Orleans, as I was saying, and Paleo, I bought some packs of cards that were like extra scenarios, and I feel like that's going to change up the game a little bit more. But at the time I would buy like a $5 card or whatever. It gets really expensive really quickly. Like you can buy the game for like 4 or 5 extra cards. But I wonder how much of that is driven by those newer players that maybe have heard of the game.
It might be, because I used to, like, if I liked a game, I would buy every expansion for the game.
Yeah.
Now, I don't care about expansions for the most part.
That's interesting.
One, because I find that a lot of the time they haven't planned for the expansion with, like, space in the box.
Yeah.
So then it's like, oh, I have to have another box on the shelf, and I don't want that. Two, partly it's, I run a convention, and so I have a convention library, and those games that I own are in the convention library, and so people are probably not playing the expansion from the library, so then there's parts that need to be kept separate but in the same box so that they know that it's different things. So I just, because of that, I don't want them either. But then also just most of the time I don't feel like they actually add much to the game. That, like, if the game is good, it's good. You don't need to keep adding a bunch of stuff. So, like, sometimes if it's new characters or things, or like we were talking about Heat before, if it's new tracks, sure, that's fine. But I don't know. Most of the time, I end up just liking the base game more than the expansion version. So why am I buying these expansions? And so I wonder if that's a thing. When you first get into it, you're like, oh, I love this thing. I'm gonna keep getting all this stuff. And now I'm just like, you know what? I don't need that.
So I just saw this, speaking of, like, so now, at a gaming convention, as we said, you had the game library there and stuff, and people that go there are probably not going to be pulling the game off the shelf to play, like, the expansion. They're just learning the base game. I mean, that's generally not the best way to do it, although some games do have, like, the essential expansion, right? Where people are like, you can't play this game without this expansion. And some things, like, I just keep mentioning Orleans because now it's on my brain, but, they have a cooperative expansion in Invasion, so I think that might be one where somebody might want to try it. But yeah, I could see why that would be a little bit of a difficult thing for you. Now, interestingly, speaking of in the box and confusing, somebody for the Puerto Rico campaign was like, there's like a BGG thread that's like 30 pages long. I didn't read it, but because I can't, I'm not the kind of guy that, like, looks at all the awful comments to make yourself feel, I don't know what people are drawn to that sort of drama or whatever. But I was kind of curious what the thread was because it was such a robust. But they were like, I know what it was. So I was looking at the solo thing because there is a solo mode now in this. As we said before, solo modes are so, I think it was last episode we were talking about, how that's becoming such a thing now. And somebody was, like, really annoyed that they were having to pay for they were like, can't you make the solo stuff optional? Buy. I don't want to have to pay for it. It's baked into the cost. I'm paying for it anyway. And then I have to find these, I have to store them and look at them. So this person was very upset about that. They didn't want to have to, to pay for them and store them and have to figure out what they are. Do you have what do you think about that? You think they should?
I think I like that it's in. So I'm very unlikely to play the solo version of a game. So I get where they're coming from, where, especially sometimes if there's a separate rule book for the solo version, when I'm, like, looking to, like, organize the game, or if I've gotten a used game and I'm looking to see if all the parts are there, when I'm going through it, I'm like, what is this thing that's in here? This isn't in the components list. Oh, it's in the components list of this other rule book. So sometimes I get confused by things that are in the box for situations like that. But yeah, I don't know. I think it just gives you another option, and it's built in.
So it's a hot take, and this is a hot take because you didn't read it. But, like, do you think that publishers should separate that out, or do you think it's not fair that people have to pay for it?
I think they should keep it in the box. It is a little bit annoying that there's stuff in there that I'm never going to use, but it's kind of the same situation of, like, I don't have kids, but I'm still paying taxes for a local school system because I'd rather people.
Well,
other people get to use it.
Yeah, there's another more closer like connection in the fact that, like, there's 3, 4, 5, 6 player pieces in the box, and a lot of people will never play that. Now, I think probably couples, friends, and stuff. I would think, I mean, I don't know what the most common, player count is in all of board gaming. That's a very fascinating subject on its own. But like, I would think like 2 players is probably one of the most common, like just from spouses.
Probably. Yeah.
Very, in games that go up to 4 players, that's a huge amount of components. Now, granted, you can see, okay, these are the yellow and blue pieces that we're not using. It's not that confusion there, but you're definitely, I mean, people are paying for pieces that they'll never use. For me personally, like solo and 2 players, really all the gaming I'm ever going to do. So like, I'm not going to use any of those pieces. So it is interesting that this person was really upset about that for that aspect of it, right? Like,
for the opposite of your situation.
Sure. So I think everybody's got. But yeah, I mean, you could see like board gaming companies, they want to appeal to the most amount of players, which is why a lot of games would go up to like 6 players, and they should never go to 6 players, etc. And there's a lot of, they're trying to get that 1 on the box. And like for me personally, like I see, I wouldn't have even considered Puerto Rico, but I saw that 1 player on the box. I was like, oh, that might be something I could play more often.
I mean, from the business side, it's easier to make 1 box and have all the stuff in there. Like that's why sometimes you get a game that it's got 4 rule books, 1 English, 1 French, 1 German, because it's easier to just do that and sell the same thing across the world.
Boy, that's wasteful.
It is, but at the
So I play Marvel Crisis Protocol. It's a miniatures game, and like you'll get a new pack. So I just bought like Apocalypse, and he's, it's like 4 copies of every card. So he's got maybe 5 different cards, and his identity card or whatever, and it's like those 6 things in like 5 different languages, and I'm like, what am I doing with all these cards? And everything they come out with now is like that. And like, so I buy every pack I buy, there's like most of the cards, I mean, I don't want to throw them away or recycle them, so I just kind of set them. I don't know, I'm just getting this stack of like, but you got to make a good point there, yeah.
The two points, and they both relate to like game design stuff. One, those cards can be helpful for prototyping stuff later on if you wanted to make your own game.
Interesting point.
But the main point is, for design purposes, it's a lot better to remove as much text as possible from your cards, so that no matter what language you're shipping it in, the cards can stay the same.
I see.
So that's why, a lot of times instead of text, you have symbols that mean text and things like that. I mean, if you have too many
then
symbols,
you get race for the galaxy.
So like I'm looking off to the side, you've got Caper there.
Oh yeah.
That was one that like I enjoyed the game while I was playing it, but there was a lot of symbols and it's hard to remember what all of them were. There's a lookup table basically for everything, but there was a little bit too much on that one. But shipping a different card for each language seems wasteful.
Absolutely wasteful. But your point in terms of like, was a really interesting point about, the SKUs, right? You don't want to have too many different boxes, but also it is really a tightrope, right? About you're bringing up about this iconography, which is like, some makes it universal, which is great, but too much, you got to look up every symbol and it's going to be confusing. Right. Yes.
Well, and it's my general philosophy when trying to design a game. I don't always follow it, but what I try to do is, and what I think makes a good game is more choices, less to remember.
Yeah.
So if you could set up the game in a way where it's obvious what a symbol means without needing to have a lookup table for it, if you have like, a hand of cards and then it says +1, it means, you get an extra card or something like that. That sort of thing. You can get away with it without needing to have a bunch of stuff. But depending on what is actually happening, in Marvel there's a lot of different things you could be doing there, so I don't know if it's possible with the way that game is set up, but it might just be baked in at this point.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like, given that there's so many games now, I wonder if there could be like some, like if you're a gamer, there are like just understood, of course, like you see a fan of cards, that's cards, but I wonder if there could be like some kind of universal iconography that every game uses, right? Like this is always a symbol for cards, like the meeple symbol, etc. Like that, like are very, but yeah, it's interesting.
There isn't, but I think somebody could make that project and like standardize it. And maybe that's something that should happen within the industry. I mean, we were talking about arcade stuff at the beginning of this. At the beginning of arcades, all the wiring was whatever anybody wanted, and then in the 80s they introduced the JAMA standard, and now every
JAMA standard.
Yes, it was like the connector on the side of the arcade,
Okay.
on the motherboard of the arcade game, the PCB, and it was here. You fit this one connector on. This one is always power. This one's always ground. This one's always first player start.
Interesting.
Etc. And then, there's options for customization after that, but it makes it so you can just swap things in and out easily.
That's awesome.
Without needing to, completely relearn how this board works every time, and then it makes it easier to troubleshoot what's going wrong.
Are you fixing them a lot?
Like I said, there's one that's a project, and that one is
you said
right before the JAMA standard, so there's a lot of looking at schematics and trying to figure out where does this wire go? What does this one do? And the schematic turned out to be wrong from what I was looking at. So,
okay, interesting.
Yeah, when you plug things in, the wires melt. That means something's going wrong.
The wires melt. Like, interesting.
Yeah,
this fire suggests that this might not be the best way.
It's a bad sign when smoke comes out of the wires.
Well, whether we like it or not, or whatever we decide is not really going to make a difference, because I think board game prices and the big Kickstarters, they can make a lot of money on it, so they're going to keep them going. But
the money's going to do what it's going to do.
And I'm probably going to be sad about it, but I probably will back some of these things because they look incredible.
Probably.
How about you got any thoughts before we move on to questions?
We can shift.
Okay. Ryan asks for best co-op games and best dice sets and why. You want to take a crack at that, or you want me to go first?
Well, I don't know what the. I mean, I assume for best co-op games you might be mentioning Sky Team, since you already brought that up. But I will. I don't know what I would put for best co-op games, but I will throw out a couple of less talked about co-op games. One, we mentioned Legendary Alien earlier, and I really like Legendary, the deck building game in general. Alien version specifically, I think is the best one they've done. Any of them that say like Legendary Encounters are pretty good. They're like kind of standalone things where it feels like you can play more on each other's turns, which is always nice in a co-op game. In a few days I have to run a game of Thunderbirds, which is
interesting.
Which is based off of the old British TV show with the marionettes. It's a Matt Leacock game, I backed the Kickstarter because I used to watch that show as a kid, and I had like little die-cast toys and stuff like that. So I was like, "Oh, neat!" And it's from Matt Leacock. He does good work on Pandemic and things like that. So I tried it out. I like it a lot. I think it's pretty neat. It can be very difficult. Like, it doesn't scale well down to like 2 players.
Okay.
So we tried playing it again recently, so I could refresh my memory, because I decided to run it at a convention, and then I need to relearn the rules because I haven't played it in a few years. And we played with 2 players, and maybe there's something I missed in the rule book that makes it easier at 2 players. But basically, you get bonuses to completing tasks based on which character you have, and so obviously the more characters you have in the game, the more likely you are to get that bonus. So at 2, it was very difficult.
Interesting.
We ended up getting close to the end, but there was like no way we were going to possibly do the ending win condition at that point. But if we had, since it's a fully co-op game, no hidden information, whatever, if we had just played 2 characters each, I think it would have been a lot more manageable.
Yeah, that's the way I like to do it.
Yeah,
I always like to do that.
So,
but that's a great theme, right?
Yeah.
It's a unique theme.
Yeah, the rest of it is really cool and thematic.
I've never played it.
It's about like maneuvering your people around the board, so you get, if there's a crisis happening in South America, but you have Virgil Tracy in South America, you get +2 to your dice roll or something like that. So it's a lot of like, if I maneuver this person and get this ship over there, then I get these bonuses, and this person already gets a +2 because it happens in the sky, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of like pre-planning, and you basically, because you lose if any of them fail.
Interesting. So do you know that? Now, I love this. The theme is great. It's a different theme, and I love stop motion, and I love Matt Leacock. He's one of my favorite designers. So this is all very interesting. That's been on my list to play since it was announced, but I just never got around to it. Now, do you know the term for the stop motion that they used?
You mean the marionation?
You're half right.
Well,
it's super
marionation. That's right.
Yeah, very, very cool. Best dice sets, so I'll say I have on my channel. I've got a ranking of my top 10 co-ops and my top 10 competitive games, so you can look at that. But I tend to love. Speaking about Leacock, the Pandemic's line is my favorite. Other than the living card games, which I also quite love, like Lord of the Rings, etc. So those are some that I really like. Now, his other part of his question here was best dice sets and why.
I do not have strong opinions on dice.
Okay, so I'm going to break this down into two things. So I'm not quite sure what the question was, whether it's best dice sets that are in a game or like dice sets that you can buy over the counter. Because you can buy, like, I was in a local game shop and they're like, there's $100 sets there. And I noticed also you are a farmer's market person. My wife sells chocolate at the farmer's market. Mm-hmm. And there's like 20 vendors there on the night market, which is the only one I'm going to because this is the Night Owl podcast. Yeah. I'm not getting up in the morning.
That's right.
And so there's like 2 different people out of like the 20 that were making like expensive or like handmade dice sets. So that's very important. But I would never buy anything like that because I'm going to play the dice that come in the box or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think it is kind of cool if you have a nicer set.
If you're an RPG gamer and they don't come with the dice, then you get your own that speak to you. And
so I'm going to mention the dice set that I think is really cool is from Descent, which I think I mentioned last episode of this episode. Really kind of interesting because I love form and function. I love when the design makes sense and things are your cognitive load is decreased or whatever. So the dice are really kind of neat. There's the blue dice have worst. The settings, the results are worse than the yellow dice, and the yellow dice are worse than the red dice. And so if your character is rolling a blue and a yellow, okay, that's fine. But the 2 red dice is a better action, so you can kind of see how strong the actions are based on those kind of dice. But if you're rolling 3 blue dice and the other one is 1 red die, maybe that's better. So I think that's kind of a neat way to be able to have a lot of different variety in the items and things. So and then any ranged attack, like a bow and arrow or something, or a crossbow, there's a special die that's used for range. So you roll the damage dice that I just talked about, but also a range die, and so you have to be able to hit them as well as having the force of it. So I think that system is really fascinating. I haven't seen it in too many other games, but I really, really love it. I think that's a really kind of a cool one. The other one, you got one to mention here?
Well, I was just going to say, since you were bringing up dice sets from people locally here, then I would recommend everyone look up Dragon Ink Dice, which is the people that sell dice at the farmers market here in town, but also at Tabletop Central. They've been a vendor multiple times, so hey, thanks for coming. Support those people. They make nice little dice and dice trays and things like that.
The other thing I'd like to mention though is that Pandemic. Speaking of Pandemic, this is actually good for this question because it's both the cooperative game and Pandemic the Cure, which I wasn't super fond of, but each of the different characters had a different set of dice with different results. So if you played a different character, they were better or worse at certain things. It's sort of a dice version of the popular game, but I just thought that system was really fascinating from a game design standpoint. I was really impressed with that. You could make different. Each person had different results. Some people had like not a result that other person could have. So it's a really interesting way to do it, I thought. Any other notes on this?
Well, a lot of the time that sort of thing would just be done by like the cards that you have at the beginning. But with dice, you don't necessarily even notice what all the sides are.
Sure,
So I'm sure a lot of people play it and don't notice that they're not as good at something until like halfway through the game, and they're like, "Wait a minute, I only have one of that symbol. Why? I shouldn't be trying this anymore."
So some games have like a little card that shows you the results of every die. If it has a lot of if that's an important element of the game. Obviously, like player aids are kind of hit or miss.
Yeah.
Sten asks, best snacks to bring for board games. Nothing with Cheeto Dust? ? What do you think? Best snacks?
Nothing that leaves a lot of residue on your hands. Ideally, things that aren't crumbly that get on the table. So I mean, just like cookies are usually pretty good, unless they're like really melty, soft cookies.
For a strong, big gaming day, I tend to like getting I find like I don't want to just sit and drink soda and eat garbage because I feel like, especially if I'm playing for a long term, like a day or something, I think that impacts your health and your thinking. I think like have some nuts, like veggies like carrot sticks and things like that. Yeah. Stuff that's like better for you, because I think like at the end of a gaming day that you're sedentary, so there's two sides to the question. Number one, obviously you don't want to make a mess. And number two is to keep yourself healthfully, like, instead of salty chips all the time. And then, sorry, I think I might have cut you off a little bit.
No. Everything you mentioned for my point about just not making a mess, everything you mentioned wouldn't make a mess.
Yeah.
Which is nice. But I wasn't even thinking about it from the, like, health standpoint. I eat garbage all the time. Is that
right? I mentioned the thing about the farmers market. It's kind of funny because, like, when I went to your convention, your wife was at the desk there when I checked in, and I was like, "How do I know you?" And she was like, "I bought chocolates from your wife last night." And I was like, "Oh yeah." And then she's like, "And I've been to your house." And I was like, "What?" Like, she was like, "Yeah, we bought board games from you before." And I was like, "Really?" And I was like, I kept expecting her to be like, yes, here's a dossier on you, like the whole file, like, or I was a sleeper agent, like she was going to be like, "The lettuce is wilting," and I was going to like have some turn into Jason Bourne or something.
Well, if you want to even bring it back further, we had been to your store at least once too.
You went to our little shop?
Yeah.
That's so crazy. Like, it's amazing that I wouldn't remember that, since like only like I would go like days without a person coming in.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So we went at least once. We remembered what it was. So when we bought games from you that one time, we saw your license plate and we're oh, it's the people from that store.
Yeah, that's funny. That's really... So, wow, that's even more like I'm really getting unnerved by the amount of information.
So it wasn't like I remembered your face or remembered who you were, but I was just like, oh yeah,
that's so funny.
So you never know. Your paths cross a lot in a small town like
so this. Like if I gave you a piece of paper, could you like write out like you got 6 years, 3 months, and 2 minutes to live? Like no.
No, we've got an unnatural amount of information.
You do. It is a little. And I had you over, and I don't really know you at all. I just know you from the aforementioned things in the gaming convention.
I mean, we weren't.
And I thought, but it is weird because there's a couple. I love true crime, and so like I look up this stuff about like all these catfishing things online and murders and stuff, and like people misrepresenting themselves online. And of course, in person is just as easy to keep secrets. So it was a little bit of a I thought when I asked you, I said, hey, I offered to you and your wife to come and maybe like split up the episodes or whatever you want to do. And I'm like, are these people going to be like, no way, because like it's a stranger kind of thing, but. It is a dangerous world we live in.
We got enough mutuals that
aren't too worried.
Yeah, I'm not too worried.
Shall we talk about some games?
Sure.
Yeah, and then I want to hear. Well, before we talk about games, I want to hear if you've your favorite Godzilla movie, since you're a big Godzilla fan.
Okay. So my favorite Godzilla movie is Godzilla versus the Sea Monster. That's the U.S. dub title. If you want the original, it's Ibira, Horror of the Deep. I think that's how you pronounce it. I found that like a lot of the original monster names, I sometimes mispronounce them because I'm only used to how I say them looking at the box as a kid. But that was the first one that I saw. That's what got me hooked. So that one will always hold a special place in my heart. It's not the best one, but it's it's the one that I will probably watch again more often than the rest of them.
So Godzilla is not that well represented in gaming. Like there are a number of Godzilla games, but nothing that's most of them not so popular.
Yeah, there's not really any great ones.
Rampage on my shelf there, which is Rampage, which is now what's the new title of it? It's Terror in Meeple City.
Terror in Meeple City. Although somebody is trying to trademark the term meeple, so maybe it'll have to change its name a third time if it goes through.
That's fascinating because actually we kind of were running a lot of time, but I was going to bring this up too. Intellectual property law has come for the word meeple, not even the little wooden board games guys are saying. This is from a Reddit post. I was going to kind of bring that up, which is kind of funny. But yeah, sorry. So
I don't think they're going to succeed on that one. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how this works, but I feel like it's already too common to be a trademark.
Well, Magic has, you can't tap. Turning the card to the sideways, Fantasy Flight calls it exhausting. Magic has coined that tapping of the card, which is to turn it to the side to show it's been used. Kind of interesting.
But I feel like whatever they did there legally, they did earlier.
Sure.
At this point, Meeple has existed for 20, 30 years in common use.
Yeah.
It is not immediately identifiable with like any one game at this point, so I think it's too late.
I hope so, because that sort of thing is very, it just causes problems for everybody.
Yeah. If not, they're just going to be dudes now.
So
this is my dude.
You're still going to call it Meeple. Doesn't matter what game it is. They can
That's true, yeah.
They'll say your pawn, and you will just call it a Meeple.
The rule book will have a different word, but they'll still have the rules.
Now, speaking of rules or words getting into commonality and stuff, I did also see that Merriam-Webster Dictionary has included the word dungeon crawler now into the...
Really?
But I mean, it makes sense. I mean, whatever you use a lot, but dungeon crawler has been, I mean, for video games and for board gaming and RPGs, all that stuff is such a ubiquitous term now.
Yeah, I'm a bit surprised that it's in a dictionary though, because it's just kind of two words put together. Like, it's not like a unique new thing. But
certainly, someone might say, like, if someone's not a gamer and someone says dungeon crawler, they might be like, "Well, I don't know what that is." And so I don't know how many people actually use an actual dictionary anymore. Most people probably just Google the term and then they'll get an AI little response to what it means. But
I mean, it means a certain thing in this context, but I'm trying to think of another example of that where you don't necessarily need a new definition for it. Like, I guess dining room.
I guess
that probably has a definition, but it's the room where you dine.
Yeah. Well, dungeon crawler,
you crawl through it.
Is kind of like a hyphenated. Isn't it a hyphenated? It's on the screen here. I put the article on the screen here. But favorite Godzilla or kaiju themed game? Do you have one? This is a hot take, so if you don't,
I mean, probably the most memorable one would be Rampage, which you have right there. Yeah. There are a couple of Godzilla games and a couple of legally distinct Godzilla games. And I feel like they all kind of play nearly identical, where it's like, oh yeah, two monsters fight each other, and then you throw somebody into a building. And
well, I know the most popular one. Can you think of the most popular one?
The most popular one?
Easily the most popular one.
Oh, what am I not thinking?
King
of Tokyo.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of that game myself, but I know it's a really good, like, kind of a gateway game for a lot of people. Yeah, somebody's playing Rampage at your convention, actually, I saw.
Yeah, and some kids checked it out, I think.
It was kids playing.
Which, we put it in there when we didn't always have it in the library. I've owned it the whole time that we've run this convention, but I didn't always bring it. The first year I didn't bring it because we were in a space that had some sloped floors and there's a lot of stuff falling around.
Sure.
And then the next couple of years it was, COVID was still a big thing. People were still masked and stuff, and I guess COVID's still a thing, but it was a lot more on people's minds, and like blowing on stuff just seemed like a bad idea.
If you don't know the game, you blow, like the monster's blowing his breath weapon, you drop the pieces. It's a lot of dexterity to knock things over. Sorry.
Yeah, so just like that idea was just like, well, let's just not bring that one this year, and let's leave that out of the library.
I am like Howard Hughes level of OCD weirdness. Like if I ever put that in the library, I'd never be touching that again. If I were you, I'd be like burning that thing. I'd be like never coming back in my house. Yeah. That's my own craziness. Well, we're running along on time here, but we want to talk about a few games and then we'll close it out here. You got a first game to talk about?
Sure. I guess so. I mentioned earlier that I was going to be running Thunderbirds at a convention, and before that, at Gen Con, I was running games for Elf Creek Games, so I was running Honey Buzz primarily. That was the most common game that I ran, or the one that I ran most often. And I think it's a neat game, and I think you should play it. I can't really think of any game like it. And like it's a worker placement game.
So you were repping this, you said, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I hope your approach when you were there was not, it's a neat game, you should play it. I hope you had a more compelling pitch.
So I was running it on the schedule, so they were already signed up. Okay. So I just needed to tell them how it works.
I'm just teasing you a little bit.
Now I had to pitch them on like the expansion that I had not played yet. So that was kind of like, look, it's got pumpkins.
pumpkins and bees.
Yeah, there's like pumpkins and apples. It's the fall themed expansion, so there's neat components in it. But I couldn't tell them a whole lot about how it played, but I could tell them that it looked cool and where to buy it.
Okay. So how does it play?
So Honey Buzz it's a worker placement game, but you place your workers to grab tiles to build out your hive, your honeycomb, and so each tile. It's hard to describe it without you seeing it, but it's basically like 2 hexes next to each other, kind of. And so as you place them into your hive, and once in each tile has a singular action on it. Either getting more bees, getting money, producing honey, this sort of thing. But you only get to do those actions once you complete a cell. So you place them around an empty cell, and once that's complete, any action that's adjacent to it you get to do. So there's a lot of like pre-planning of like how you're going to build the thing so that those actions are where you want them to be. And then you fill those cells with nectar. Nectar produces honey, and then you sell the honey to bears and other woodland creatures to get money. And money is the victory points that win you the game. But
yeah, you're very big. Like we kind of saw last episode that you have such as you want to build this community, and you have this gaming convention that you do, and like you work a lot with Kudo Plays locally, helping local designers. Very wholesome. All of it's very wholesome to me. It's very good. Yeah.
Well, I try.
So
so Elf Creek Games.
Yeah, is a local company, right? Somewhat local.
They were local company.
Okay.
Now they're based out of St. Louis.
Now you're like, no more help for you. You don't live near me.
No, they're still our friends. I when they moved, I loaded their U-Haul. Okay. So but
oh my God! And you help people move. Is there no end to your kind acts?
I mean, I wasn't doing the most work that night. There's another guy, Jason, who was like deep into the truck. Yeah. I'm
calling him when I move.
Yeah, they had movers that packed the truck, but they didn't get everything, so we needed to find new ways to get things past where they were in. So he was the guy. He just dove over the top and went in. I was like, I'm not doing all this.
So I do own Honey Buzz. I did enjoy playing it. I think that like building an ant hive, or a beehive or an ant colony. I think those are like something about those two. Themes are really exciting for me. I really like them, and I think people, bees are such a cool, interesting, insect. Bug or insect. I don't know which. There's a difference between those, but
they're the same thing.
Bug and insect. Actually, I just read a book about this, and they're actually not the same thing.
Really,
they're not the same term. But anyway, as a little critter, they're really awesome. They do a lot of helpful things. They're fascinating to me, the way the colonies work and the queen and all that. So I think they could come out with bee themed games till the end of time, and I'd be happy with it. The game is interesting. It has a spatial aspect, as you mentioned. I do think it was a very enjoyable game.
Yes. And it has pretty nice components.
Yeah.
And especially if you get the deluxe components, then like the honey's kind of squishy plastic.
Oh yeah.
You don't get a whole lot of. Yeah. And the bees are fuzzy. Yeah. The beeples.
That's very cool. My first game is actually a game that Dan Dudley talked about on one of our recent episodes, which was Kinsfire Delve. This is a whole system of games. There's 3 different boxes, and each box comes with a villain, and then this is cooperative, and you have 2 different decks for your seekers, which are kind of like the heroes. Each of these boxes has the villain and the 2 heroes, and you can mix and match the boxes, which is pretty cool. They're very lovely. I mean, have you seen this before?
No, I don't think so.
The components, all the cards for the hero decks are like gold foil embossed. Ooh. Like, I mean, drool worthy. I mean, some of the nicest cards I've seen in any game. So pretty inexpensive, but very, very nice production. Now this was kind of sold to me because I'm a big fan of the LCGs, like Marvel Champions, Lord of the Rings, etc. And so he was telling me there was a very similar to that. Now, that's true in a way because you have like this pre-built deck, but you don't have to build it going in. You just play that deck. But what's really fascinating is a lot of these games you build up a board state. The games that I like to play, like Marvel Champions and stuff, you're building upgrades. You're building, you're putting allies into play. You're sort of getting stronger and stronger until you're kind of pushing through to the end. This game is super tactical. You have a hand of cards, and you decide, I'm going to go against one of the 4 challenges. maybe you might go because it's a green card and that's green, so you can only go to that. Maybe there's two, maybe something you're going to say, I'll play my red cards against this thing. You can boost actions. It's not very useful. It's not as efficient. Your teammate can boost. You kind of share this life total. But I really find it interesting because it's like a version of those games. So you have different characters that have different kind of mechanisms the way they play. But it's so tactical. You're sitting there. You're like, okay, what am I going to do this turn? I'll play this because I have a strong chance of beating this, but this one over here maybe has a worse effect that's kind of affecting everything. And so it's just a very tactical version of these kind of games, and it plays very, very quickly. There's some definite cooperations. You can bring different characters that maybe complement each other, or you can boost each other's actions. Like I said, you share a life total, so you have to be careful. But it was it's like those games, those LCGs play fairly quickly. They could play in about an hour or so, depending on the scenario or the villain, depending on which game you're playing. But this one went by like pretty quickly, and it's kind of nice to have something that is meaty enough to work on, but not so overwhelming. So yeah, I thought that was really kind of neat. I played the first one, and you can see a playthrough and a review about Vainglory's Grotto. The idea is you're kind of going down into this well, completing these challenges until you get to the boss. And I just started the second box. I don't know if it's in order. It was Acorn, something like that. And it is easily 10 times as hard as the other one. The other one I was like winning almost every game, and this one I played, it is brutal comparatively, but very interesting. Do you play a lot of those kind of games?
No. I mean, I don't play as many games as I should. So, no, I mean, and most of the like I said before, most of the time when I play games, they end up being prototype games or unpublished things. So, yeah, people around here just haven't really made things like that. So,
well, you were telling me about a Mountain Goat game. Was that sounds kind of
So
along the same lines as the
that one's a published game. That one's not. I don't know the designer of that one. I don't think. It's called Mountain Goats.
It's a small box game.
Singular or plural, I don't remember. But yeah, it's tiny, like, this big. And yeah, I mean, it's just, you have a bunch of cards out, basically, that give you your slopes of the mountain. You got little goat meeples that look pretty nice. And it's simple dice rolling game, kind of. You roll dice and you can add them together to be different totals, and the mountains say like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so every time you get one of those numbers, you can go up to the top. So if you have a 2 and a 3, you can combine them together to be a 5 to move up. And basically you get points when you get to the top. You get a point token that says
so can you choose to use the 3 or can you do 3, 2, or 5?
So you can't. There's no 3 and 2. There's just 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But you could do, you could do like a 6 and a 3 to be a 9, or you could just use the 6 on its own and combine the 3 with something else. Something like that. It's pretty luck dependent. It's not like a super strategic game. There's a little bit of strategy, and you get bonus points like the first person to get one of each of the tokens, but it's over in like 20 minutes. So it's not very big, doesn't require a lot of brain power, but there's enough there to keep you interested for the amount of time that it's on the table.
You gonna hang on this one, or is it gonna be in the used board game sale?
Well, that is one that I played at somebody else's house, so I don't own it. I don't think I'll buy it probably, but maybe. I mean, it's like if I didn't run a convention, no. Since I do run a convention, it's kind of a good library game for someone to check out to fill time between other things. So maybe.
So you that mechanism I was kind of thinking was like more like Kingsburg, where you can pick. You ever play that where you have some dice and you're like, well, do I want to add them all together and put my meeple up here, or do I want to use each dice and put out 3 different meeples? It's kind of an interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, except there's some that you can't use every number on its own. So the lower numbers you have to combine together, or just leave it as a wasted die.
My other game is Horrified, the World of Monsters. This is a series that I've been kind of playing all of them. I've not played the Greek monster one, although I own it. I'm going to be doing probably a comparison of all of them. at some point. But this one has, like worldly. You got the Sphinx, you have the Hopping Vampire, you have Cthulhu, which, I'm kind of like, there's enough Cthulhu games. I kind of wish they'd picked a different monster for it. And then you have the Yeti, which I love the Yetis. I love the Sasquatches and stuff. I love them. So it's as a system, I'm going to relate it to the other Horrified games. It's like essentially it's very similar to like a cooperative game like Pandemic, but instead of hand management, it's more of a pick up and deliver. There's all these sort of things that you're doing you have to beat each of the monsters in turn. So usually you want to kind of do one monster's quest to finish them off so that then you have less and less monsters running around to hurt you, and you're picking up items from various locations. So I played the other games in the series, as I said, and this one is something that people wanted for a while, which is the ability to mix and match. Now, normally the sets have, a single deck that goes with that set, and it's very thematic. Now, this one I find I do not like as much. I think it's a fine game. If you like that series, you're going to enjoy it. But it's much more generalized. So, in the Universal Monsters version, Dracula turn into a bat, move around. You'll have these very thematic cards. Now, because it's supposed to be used for all the other sets, and probably going forward, they're just like the monster attacks or whatever. And so I feel like they lose a lot from that, because I think the original Horrified and the American Monsters one I thought were like so thematic, and I really, really like that. I think they lose a lot of that. Also, it's a little more, the game has a lot more symbols on it, because they're, instead of just saying, okay, looking at the card and saying, okay, the mummy is going to attack and, the Sasquatch is going to attack, whatever, well, that's two different games. Mummy and Wolfman are going to attack. Okay, then you activate those two monsters. This, there's like 4 different symbols, and you go and you look at every monster's symbols and have to decide which, figure out which one's going. So a lot more tedious. So I think, like, for me personally, I'm not going to be opening boxes and mixing all these things. I don't really care. It's not that complicated of a game for me. So I think they lose out some. It's still a very solid game. I did like it, but I think compared to the other games in the series, I'm not a big fan of that. And I think going forward, it's probably not going to be as, it's not going to be a series I pursue as much, because it's kind of it's a little bit less for me. Have you? I know you've played some of these games.
Yeah, I have the original one and the American Monsters one. I never picked up the Greek one or this new one, partly because it's like, well, the American one is pretty similar to the Universal one, but I don't care as much about the Jersey Devil as I do about the Creature from the Black Lagoon. So it was like, I don't know that I need the Minotaur one and stuff like that. But have you played any of the like fan characters that people have made?
No, I'm not. I know you're much more like of a playtester and stuff like that. I'm not really. I usually only go after published content myself, personally.
Okay. Well, so for Horrified, I have like a Phantom of the Opera expansion that somebody made, because they have like all the rest of the classic Universal monsters except the one from the best movie.
That's your favorite?
Yeah, the 1925 Phantom of the Opera is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Of all time, okay, interesting.
Yeah,
I think for me, the Bride of Frankenstein is I think the best out of that series.
Yeah, I say the silent Phantom of the Opera, not the Claude Rains one. That one is not very good.
I like Claude Rains in his
He's good,
Invisible Man.
Yeah.
That's my one of my other favorites.
But there's a lot of other ones that people have made. Like they've gone like really deep into some of the other ones. The Raven, the Black Cat, like some of the other Universal monsters. But then there's also a whole second game that somebody made, Terrified.
Yeah.
That's like Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Chucky, like all the like slasher villains and stuff. I haven't played that, but it's kind of neat, and there's 3D printed files online that you can get for all of them, which is cool.
So that's, in terms of like the Universal Monsters is one license. It's an expensive license from Universal, and you have to deal with, those properties that you listed for the Terrified fan-made game, they're never going to be in the same game because there's too many licenses.
Yeah, probably not.
There's too many competing licenses. I remember seeing Bruce Campbell talk once before about people were like, are you ever going to do Ash versus Freddy versus Jason, which people were talking about. This is like 10, 15 years ago, and he said Ash versus Freddy versus never going to happen, not in a million years, because the money has to be cut up too many different ways. So it's kind of interesting, but I think the strength that getting that Universal Monsters one was so thematic. You
everything never know,
was
though. There is a to bring it back to Godzilla.
Sure, yeah, let's talk about it.
There is a Japanese PlayStation 4 game called City Shrouded in Shadow.
Okay.
And it's like a survival horror thing. It's not very good, but you could play through it. But it has Godzilla, it has Ultraman, it has Evangelion, it has Gamera, it has Pat Lemore. It's got like a bunch of things from different people that are all, they're not on screen at the same time.
Yeah.
But they're different levels. So you never know. It's possible.
Anything's
especially
possible.
with like Funko owns a license to everything and put them all together and stuff. So you might get a weird Funko version of it at least.
Interesting. I think like if you enjoy the Horrified series, it's more of the same. I do think it does take a ding because it's not as thematic and it's a lot more fiddly in nature because of those things. But we'll see. I think people wanted this ability to mix and match, and I think that's kind of like, I don't know how many people are really going to be doing that to some extent. I'm sure a lot of people were hoping for it. There's also some weird rule stuff with it where I was just like, oh my god. After somebody watched, I actually have a playthrough of that on the channel as well. Somebody watched this playthrough and they were like, well, these things are wrong because there's errated rules. Some of the rules that were written in a way where people are like, oh yes, that's obvious, and apparently they didn't intend it that way. And I'm like, I don't know how many people are really looking for errata and rules updates for a game that like of that weight. It seems a bit crazy to me.
I only look it up if something seems obviously broken.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're running short on time here, so I think we'll probably end it there. Anything else you'd like to say, or tell people where they can find you?
Thanks for having me. We talked a lot on the last episode about my convention, but if you would like to go to a convention somewhere in central Illinois, then you should look up Tabletop Central at tabletopcentral.com.
And the link will be below.
Yes, we happen every September, the weekend after Labor Day, usually somewhere towards the beginning of September.
Yeah, maybe you'll see me there too if you watch the channel and stuff. Come out and say hello.
Yes.
So for now, thanks for joining us. I think our next guest, we're going to be doing more Kudo plays. We're going to go in a little deeper dive. Sorry we didn't do that with you, and hopefully we'll have you back on another point to talk about some of that stuff.
She's been in it longer than me,
and a little bit of Essen talk as well, which is very exciting. Is there any game coming out of Essen that you were really excited about?
No, I have not been really following what new stuff is coming out then. So.
Yeah. Somebody, there was a pickup for that Orleans anniversary box, and I was like, do I know anybody well enough that they could bring this thing back for me? But that's a pretty big ask.
Yeah.
But yeah, a very big convention. You've not been there, of course.
No, I've been to Gen Con. I've been to Origins, but I've never made it out to us.
Well, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next episode. But for now, I gotta roll.